It was raining sideways on 72nd Street, the kind of rain that made the whole city feel like it was being peeled back, layer by layer. Clara Miller, carrying a brown paper bag with a frozen salmon fillet, a bottle of cheap wine, and a block of butter, climbed the stairs to the apartment she'd called home for the past 7 years. Apartment 4C. It was the same door she'd walked through thousands of times, the one she decorated with pine cones in winter and a yellow wreath in spring, the one she leaned against on bad days and danced past on good ones. She slipped her key into the lock. It didn't turn. Clara paused, tried again. Then again with her spare. Nothing. She knelt down, wiped the key against her sweater, tried once more. The lock had definitely been changed. Her heart began to race. She knocked, soft at first, then louder. The door opened a few inches, and standing there, barefoot, in a silk robe, with a cigarette in one hand and a small dog under the other arm, was a woman Clara had never seen in her life. The woman blinked. "Can I help you?" Clara stepped back. This is 4C. This is my apartment." No," the woman said, frowning. "I just moved in last week. Paid my deposit and everything. You must have the wrong floor." Clara's voice cracked. "No, I live here. My husband is Tom Miller. The second left for a few weeks to visit my sister. He told me to take a break, but this is my place." The woman's expression darkened. "Lady, I don't know who you are, but I'm calling building security." The door slammed shut. Clara stood frozen. She pulled out her phone and called Tom. Once, twice, 5 times. On the 6th, he picked up. "Yeah?" "Tom, what the hell is going on? I'm locked out." There was a pause. "Clara, what are you doing there?" "I'm home. I mean you're home. There's a woman inside. She says she lives there. The locks, they're changed." He sighed like she'd spilled coffee on a contract. "Clara, we talked about this. You signed the papers. We finalized everything 3 months ago. The apartment is under my name. I've moved on." Her throat tightened. "What papers?" "I didn't sign anything." "You sent them back, Clara. Your signature's on file. I have them with the lawyer." "I really don't have time for this," he said, and he hung up. Clara stood there, rain soaking through her clothes, her fingers numb. Security arrived 10 minutes later. The woman inside insisted she was being harassed. Clara tried to explain, but her name wasn't on the lease anymore. Her ID had her old address. There was no proof, no help. They escorted her out of the building. She sat on the steps with her bags, soaked to the skin, watching people walk past like she was invisible. She had nowhere to go. No keys, no wallet, just her phone and a debit card with maybe $500 left in the account. The rest had been managed by Tom. Trusted to Tom. People passed without looking, until one woman stopped, looked at her, then did a double take. She stepped closer, cautious. "Excuse me, are you Clara?" Clara raised her head slowly. The woman was in hospital scrubs, hair pulled back, a faint scar under her chin. "You don't remember me, do you?" the woman said softly. 2 years ago, near the bridge on 85th. I was going to jump. You didn't talk. You didn't yell. You just held my sleeve until I stepped down." Clara blinked. Her mind scrambled to place the face. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "You saved my life. Now maybe I can return the favor." She extended her hand. My name's Julia, and tonight you are coming with me." Clara hesitated for just a second and then let someone help her stand. Oh, not because she believed in miracles, but because for the first time that night, someone said her name like it still meant something. Julia's apartment was on the third floor of an aging walk-up, tucked behind a laundromat. The hallway smelled faintly of bleach and something sweet, maybe incense, maybe stale donuts. The lights flickered when they walked past. Inside, the space was tiny but warm. A futon bed, one shelf of books, a folding table set against a window with no curtain. There was only one chair, slightly crooked, and a calendar on the fridge that said, "You made it this far, keep going." Julia handed Clara a towel before even speaking. "Bathroom's through there. You can leave your wet stuff by the door." Clara nodded, still shell-shocked. Her hands trembled as she peeled off the soaked jacket and socks. She moved like someone who hadn't been inside her own skin in days. She returned in borrowed sweats and a t-shirt that read, "Nurses do it with heartbeats." Julia was waiting in the kitchen area, pouring tea into two mismatched mugs. "I only have chamomile," she said, "and no sugar, unless you count a grape jelly packet I stole from work." Clara almost smiled. They sat in silence for a moment. Rain ticked on the window like fingernails. Finally, Clara whispered, "I didn't sign anything." Julia nodded. "He forged it." Clara shook her head. "I don't know. I left town for 3 weeks. My sister was sick and he told me to take time to clear my head. When I came back..." Julia didn't say, "That's illegal." She didn't say, "Go to the police." She simply said, "I believe you." Clara's throat tightened. No one had said that in a long time. "I worked," she said quietly. "Not full-time, not since the layoffs. But I cooked, cleaned, planned holidays. I made that apartment a home. I didn't think I had to protect it from him." Julia leaned back, sipping her tea. "I was engaged once. He didn't take my apartment, but he took my self-worth for about a year." Clara looked at her. "Did you get it back?" Julia nodded. "Mostly, but not alone." The rain slowed outside. Clara stood and looked around. The walls were bare, except for a corkboard pinned with photos, hospital badges, sticky notes, a photo of Julia with a group of nurses, all grinning like they'd just survived a war. She stared at the corkboard. Something clicked. "I had mail at that apartment. Bank statements, health stuff. My birth certificate was in that drawer under the sink." Julia looked up. "Did you have a copy?" "No, but I had one thing that could prove it was mine. I think." "What?" Clara turned. "My name was still on the electric bill. I know it. He hated paperwork. I always paid the utility bill." Julia stood. "We can check. Tomorrow. Go in person." Clara's voice trembled, but it had force behind it. "Then I'm going to a lawyer. A real one. Someone who's not friends with my husband." Julia raised her mug. "Now that's the Clara I remember." Clara smiled, for real this time. It hurt her cheeks. "You only met me once." "Yay," Julia said. "But you showed up for a stranger when you didn't have to. That version of you? She's not gone. She's just been quiet." Clara reached for her tea and clinked mugs with Julia. The warmth seeped into her hands, into her chest. "Maybe," she thought, "I don't need a key to get back in." Maybe I need to stop knocking on the wrong door. The next morning, the sky cracked open with sun, like it was trying to apologize for the storm. Clara stood in front of Julia's mirror, running a comb through her damp hair and practicing how to sound calm. Her voice still shook when she rehearsed it. I'm here to verify account information. I need a duplicate bill. I'm not crazy. Julia emerged from the kitchen holding out a protein bar and a borrowed denim jacket. You good? Clara nodded. Good as I'm going to get. They took the bus across town to the utility office, an ugly beige building with linoleum floors and a permanent line that smelled like tension and cheap coffee. Clara clutched her ID, her old debit card, and the only thing she had with her name on it, a faded rewards card from a grocery store she hadn't been to in months. At the counter, she slid everything across to the clerk. I need to see the most recent statement for apartment 4C under the name Clara Miller. Or Clara Wexler, maybe. That was my maiden name. It would have been paid from a joint account. Or a credit card ending in 7812. The clerk, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses and a tired face, stared at her like she was halfway to hysterical. Then she typed and paused. Looks like the name was changed 6 weeks ago, she said, to Thomas Miller only. Clara swallowed. And before that? The clerk looked again. Clara W. Miller was on the bill since 2017. Last payment under that name was made. Here, March 2nd. That's me, Clara whispered. The woman hesitated. Then she reached under the counter, pulled out a printer slip, and handed it to her. Officially, I'm not supposed to give you this, but if I were you, I'd take it to someone who can help. Clara stared at the printout like it was gold. It had her name, the apartment number, the billing cycle. Proof. Real proof. They left the office in silence. On the sidewalk, Clara turned to Julia. He never thought I'd come back. Julia nodded. Or he thought you'd be too scared to fight. Clara held the paper to her chest. I've been scared of everything for so long. My own shadow, my own voice. But right now I feel angry and alive. Julia smiled. That's a good place to start. That afternoon, Clara booked a consultation at a legal aid office downtown. The receptionist barely looked up, told her to come back in 4 days. 4 days? Anything sooner? Clara asked. The woman shrugged. You can try the courthouse walk-in desk. Maybe someone there can review your claim. She tried not to scream. That evening, back in Julia's apartment, Clara sat on the floor with a blank notebook and started writing everything she remembered. Dates, names, payments, the drawer where she kept her documents. Every line made her fingers ache. Every line made her stronger. Julia brought over a plate of microwaved spaghetti. You need to eat if you're going to take down a man who weaponized real estate. Clara grinned. Then her phone lit up. Unknown number. She answered without thinking. Clara, said a woman's voice, smooth, cold. This is Angela. I think we met briefly outside 4C. Just so you know. If you show up again, I'll call the police. I don't care what you think you're entitled to. You're not on the lease. You're not on anything. The call cut out. Clara stared at the screen. Julia leaned over. Who was that? Clara's voice was calm, firmer than ever. His new girlfriend, or maybe his lawyer. Or maybe both. Julia looked horrified. Wait. Clara stood. It doesn't matter. She'll call the police. Let her. I'll bring the paperwork, and if they try to drag me out again. She held up the utility bill like a flag. I'm not the one who'll be leaving in handcuffs. On Monday morning, Clara dressed with precision, not fashion purpose. Gray slacks Julia had once worn to an interview, a navy blouse that didn't wrinkle, and low black shoes that wouldn't make her slip on the courthouse marble. She looked at herself in the mirror. The same woman stared back, same tired eyes, same crease above her brow. But something behind the eyes was different now. Not anger, not pride. Direction. The courthouse lobby smelled like metal and coffee lids. Security asked for ID. Clara handed over her license and utility bill. What's the purpose of your visit? The guard asked. She hesitated. I'm here to find out if I still exist. The guard blinked. You here for housing court? She nodded. Walk-in desk, 3rd floor, elevators to the left. She rode up alone. Till the 2nd floor. The door slid open and Tom stepped in. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Clara said flatly, You're early. You always were early when something was about to fall apart. Tom looked uncomfortable. He was dressed too well for a Monday morning, like someone prepared for charm or for damage control, depending on the hour. Clara, he said, attempting warmth, let's not make this ugly. You already made it ugly. He sighed. I know this is hard for you. I just thought, after everything, you'd prefer a clean break. You forged my signature. I didn't. Don't lie. Not here. The elevator opened. Clara stepped out first, shoulders back. Tom didn't follow. She looked over her shoulder. You're not coming? I have a meeting with a partner. She laughed. Does Angela know she's not the first woman you've manipulated into signing something she didn't understand? Tom's face hardened. You always had a way of playing the victim, Clara. She raised the paper in her hand. And now I've got a way to stop playing anything. At the walk-in desk, a young woman with a pixie cut and impatient pen strokes reviewed her documents. So you're saying your ex-husband filed for divorce without your knowledge, removed you from the apartment, and claims you signed off on it all? Yes. And you didn't? No. The woman stared at her for a moment, then wrote quickly. This is technically fraud. If you're willing to submit a sworn affidavit, we can issue a formal request to review the property transfer. Depending on the results, the lease may be frozen. Clara blinked. Frozen? Meaning no one can legally occupy the apartment until the court decides who it belongs to. She slid over a form. Are you willing to testify under oath? Clara picked up the pen. My name is Clara Miller. I lived in apartment 4C for 7 years, and no one, not even my husband, had the right to erase me from my own life. She signed. By evening, she returned to Julia's apartment carrying 2 copies of her affidavit, a printed court date, and a folder she hadn't let go of all day. Julia was frying onions in a pan. How'd it go? Clara dropped the papers on the table. He can't rent the apartment. He can't sell it. He can't even breathe on it without filing new paperwork. Julia raised her spatula like a toast. Justice served, with sautéed vegetables. Clara leaned against the wall. I thought seeing him would destroy me, but it didn't. Why? Because I didn't feel small this time. He looked ordinary. I used to think he was a mountain. Today he was a man in an elevator. Julia smiled. That's how you know you're healing. When the people who hurt you shrink back down to size. Clara picked up a slice of pepper, chewed thoughtfully. I'm not going back to that apartment, even if I win. Julia paused. You're not? No, I want something new, with no memories in the walls. Julia nodded. I think I know a place, nothing fancy, but there's good light. Good, Clara said. I need proof of light. The next morning was unusually quiet. No rain, no wind, just the city breathing through bus engines and distant sirens. Clara stood in front of a brick building on 11th Avenue, clutching a folded piece of paper Julia had given her. It was a sublet in attic studio owned by one of Julia's co-workers who'd left for a fellowship in Spain. Month to month, no credit check, low rent if Clara agreed to keep the plants alive and the radiator from groaning itself to death. She knocked. A tall, tired-looking man opened the door. You're Clara? Yes. He handed her a key. Don't ask why it's shaped like a frog. I didn't make it. She smiled despite herself. The studio was small but sun-drenched. Slanted windows, dust motes floating the light like lazy stars, a futon bed, a chipped dresser, a fridge that made a soft wheeze every few minutes. Clara walked to the window and opened it wide. She didn't cry. Not today. She unpacked the few things Julia had helped her gather. A pair of books, the folder of legal papers, and from the very bottom of her bag, something she'd nearly forgotten. A small metal box, the kind people kept receipts or passport photos in. She sat on the bed, opened the latch. Inside, a baby photo of herself with her grandmother. A fortune cookie slip that once read, "You are stronger than your shadow." And a key, not to any apartment, just a generic worn-out key she'd found in her mother's drawer years ago and kept for no real reason. She held it up now, ran her finger over the teeth. Back then, it had meant nothing. Now it meant choice. She grabbed a sticky note from the dresser, wrote one word on it. Oh, mine. And stuck it to the inside lid of the box. That evening, Clara returned to the legal aid office for a follow-up. Her case had been accepted. The court date was set. She would testify. Tom had been served papers that afternoon. Julia texted, "Dinner's on me tonight. You pick the place." Clara replied, "Anywhere with wine and no elevator." She got back a laughing emoji. Later, just before sunset, Clara sat on the fire escape of her new place, sipping tea and watching people below rush towards something, a train, a job, a version of themselves they weren't yet tired of. For the first time in weeks, her body wasn't tense to run or break. She didn't want apartment 4C back. She wanted herself back. And slowly, piece by piece, she was finding her. Clara came home on Wednesday to find a cardboard package propped against her door. No return address. No markings except her name, handwritten in blocky, slanted letters she hadn't seen in years. She froze, heart pounding. Inside her apartment, she stared at it for 10 long minutes before finally slicing it open with a butter knife. There was no note, just a stack of manila folders. Her breath caught. Inside the first one were photocopies of documents, her original birth certificate, passport application, Bank statements with her name and joint account information dated well past the supposed divorce. The second folder held photos of her in her own apartment, at the window, folding laundry, carrying groceries. Clara's skin went cold. They were taken from a distance, like surveillance, but not recently. These were old, from years ago, before the cracks showed. She dropped the photo. In the bottom of the box sat one final item, a flash drive. No label, no explanation. Julia arrived an hour later to find Clara sitting on the floor, legs crossed, the box open beside her. "You look like someone just read your mind." Clara held up the drive. "I think Tom kept tabs on me for years, even when we were married." Julia knelt down. "You think he sent it? Who else would?" They plugged the drive into Clara's laptop. One folder, one video. Clara hit play. It was security camera footage dated the day she left for her sister's house. It showed Tom at her desk, opening drawers, removing documents, tucking them into his briefcase. A few hours later, another clip. Him meeting a notary. Her signature already on the page. Clara stared at the screen, numb. He forged it. He knew she'd never return in time. He planned it like a business merger. Julia whispered, This is enough to prove premeditated fraud." Clara nodded slowly. "But why send it to me?" Julia's jaw tightened. "Because he thinks it won't matter. He thinks you're too small to fight back. Or maybe he's trying to scare you." Clara reached into the box, took out one photo, a picture of herself smiling, holding a coffee cup in her robe by the window. "I think this was a message." Julia frowned. "What kind of message?" Clara looked up. "That I belonged there once, that he took it, and that he's still watching." The next day, Clara brought the entire box to her legal team. They stared in disbelief. "This isn't just a divorce case," one lawyer said. "This is identity manipulation, fraud, possibly even stalking." The young paralegal leaned over. "This footage, did he have cameras in the apartment?" Clara nodded slowly. "He must have, hidden ones. I never knew." The lawyer looked at her with something close to pity. "This may be bigger than we thought." Clara looked down at the file. "No," she said, "it's exactly as big as it always was. I just stopped pretending it wasn't." The room went quiet. Then the lead attorney spoke again. "We'll submit this to the court immediately, and we'll request a restraining order." Clara exhaled, not because she was safe yet, but because now someone else had seen the shadows too. The courthouse hallway smelled like overpolished tile and nerves. Clara sat on a hard plastic bench outside room 204B, her folder clutched to her chest like a life vest. Today was the hearing. Tom would be there. And so would Angela, the woman who answered the door to Clara's home and called security on her like she was a trespasser. Clara had worn her simplest clothes. No makeup, no jewelry. Just herself. Unadorned. Unafraid. A young woman with red heels and a silver clipboard stepped out of the courtroom. "Miller." Clara stood. Tom was already inside when she entered. He sat next to a man in a tight gray suit with a sharp jaw and a colder smile. Angela sat one row back, arms crossed, eyes locked on Clara like a gun with no safety. Clara walked past them, chin high. The judge was a woman, middle-aged, no nonsense. She adjusted her glasses and reviewed the documents in front of her. Mrs. Miller. Miss, Clara corrected softly. The judge nodded. Miss Miller, you've submitted evidence that contradicts the original divorce filing, including video of the defendant removing personal documents without consent and signing papers under your name. Yes. And this flash drive contains surveillance footage? Yes. Do you have proof you never authorized the signature? Clara held up a sheet of paper, a written statement, signed in front of a new notary. This is my real signature. The one on the filing. It's traced. It was copied from our 2014 mortgage document. The judge raised an eyebrow. That's specific. I remember the day I signed that mortgage, Clara said. I pressed too hard and bled through the page. There's a small smudge ditch in the M. The same one appears on the divorce signature, identical, even though that was years later. It was copied. She turned to the opposing counsel. Can he explain how a fresh signature mimics a 6-year-old ink bleed? Silence. Tom's lawyer leaned forward. Your Honor, we're not disputing the complexity of emotions in this case, but... Emotions? Clara snapped. This isn't about emotions, it's about theft. He didn't just take my name off a lease. He took my sense of safety, my right to exist. The judge raised a hand. Miss Miller, I understand. Clara sat down slowly. After a brief recess, the judge returned with a decision. Based on the evidence presented, the court finds sufficient cause to freeze the lease agreement of apartment 4C pending investigation. Furthermore, the divorce decree will be reviewed for legal validity. Temporary restraining order is granted. Defendant is to refrain from contact of any kind. Clara's breath caught. Angela stood suddenly. He never said she'd fight like this. The judge shot her a glare. Excuse me. Angela shrank into the bench. Tom didn't look at Clara as she left the courtroom, but someone else did. In the lobby, a woman approached Clara cautiously. Late 40s, curly brown hair, a cautious smile. I'm sorry, she said. I know this is strange, but I was on the jury last year. For a completely different case. Your name sounded familiar. Clara blinked. Okay. The woman reached into her purse, pulled out a crumpled envelope. I used to clean apartments in your building. 4th floor. I found this under a radiator. Thought it might matter. It has your name. Clara opened it. Inside was an old receipt from a locksmith, dated exactly 2 days before she returned from her sister's. Tom's name was on it. The note attached. Change all locks before she's back, include mailbox. Her hands trembled. Why did you keep it? Clara asked. The woman smiled gently. Because I've seen men like him before, and women like you usually walk away with nothing. I thought, maybe one day you'd walk back. Clara folded the paper carefully and placed it inside her folder with the rest. Thank you, she said, her voice quiet but solid. Not broken. Not anymore. Clara returned to the studio that evening and sat in the dark for a long time, not because she was afraid, because she wasn't. Her case was officially reopened. Her existence had been validated, and Tom, for the first time in their entire marriage, had no power left to speak over her. Still, she couldn't shake the weight of everything that had happened. The cameras, The faked signature, the receipt, the life she'd lived half asleep. She pulled out her notebook and wrote 2 columns on the page. What he took: apartment, credit, confidence, silence. What I took back: name, witnesses, proof, voice. She paused, then added one more: future. The next morning, Julia called. "You up?" Clara yawned into the receiver. "Just barely." "There's something you should see. Meet me in front of the old place. 4C. 15 minutes. Clara hesitated. "Why?" "Because sometimes you don't move on until you stand where you fell." 20 minutes later, Clara stood across the street from the building that had once held everything: her love, her safety, her belief in permanence. Julia nodded toward the front door where 2 men in city uniforms were speaking to the landlord. "What's going on?" Clara asked. Julia grinned. "You know how the mailbox locks were changed without notice? Guess what else? Turns out the hallway camera system wasn't properly disclosed to tenants. Fire code violation, unauthorized surveillance. A tenant, not me, filed a report." Clara stared at her. Julia shrugged. "I may have whispered in someone's ear at the housing board, hypothetically." The landlord looked agitated. A clipboard was signed. One of the workers walked past them towards the stairwell. "I'm not going in," Clara said. "You don't have to." She turned to leave, then stopped. Near the base of the stairs, tucked beside the building's railing, someone had placed a potted orchid. Pale white petals, fragile and precise, a handwritten note stuck in the soil. "You were never invisible." Clara stared. "Is this you?" she asked Julia. Julia looked genuinely surprised. "Nope." She bent down and lifted the tag. There was no signature, just a stamped mark in the corner. A small drawing of a lock open. Clara blinked, then smiled. That night, back in her studio, Clara lit a candle. She took out the velvet jewelry box she'd almost tossed months ago and placed the orchid beside it. She didn't know who left it. Maybe a neighbor, maybe someone from the court, maybe the woman from the lobby. Or maybe it didn't matter. What mattered was that someone had seen her and left a sign. She opened her notebook and wrote 3 new words under her future list: hope, witness, growth. Then she turned out the lights and slept through the night, for the first time in a long, long while. 3 weeks later, Clara received an envelope with no name, no return address, just her studio's street number scrawled in faded blue ink. She nearly threw it out. But something about the handwriting made her pause. Inside was a folded sheet of yellow legal paper and a single Polaroid photo slightly overexposed, showing a woman leaning out the window of apartment 4C, smiling at someone below. Oh, it wasn't Clara. But the window, the brick, the curtains, they were hers, or had been. She unfolded the paper. The letter began without a greeting. "I know what I did, but I also know she won't ever write you, so I am. Not to excuse what happened, just to say this: it wasn't about you. It never was." Clara's eyes narrowed. "He does this to women who glow, who soften things, who build homes out of emptiness. He tears them down and calls it necessary." The words felt like a slow unraveling. "I moved out last week. You probably already know the court notice, the housing complaint. He says you turned everyone against him." that you're a manipulator. But when I found the camera under the bookshelf, the one pointed at the bed, I stopped believing him." Clara's throat tightened. "I should have known earlier. I think I did." At the bottom, one final line in different ink. "He'll try again, but not with me." There was no signature, only an initial. A. Clara stared at the photo again. Angela. Not a threat, not a rival. Another victim. Julia came by later with coffee and a list of open volunteer programs at the community center. "You okay?" she asked. Clara handed her the letter. Julia read it silently, then folded it slowly. "I thought she was just another one," Clara said. "But she was stuck too." Julia nodded. "We all get stuck. The lucky ones get out." Clara took the photo and pinned it on her corkboard, next to the sticky note that read "Mine." Not as a reminder of pain, but of escape. And that some women, even the ones who arrive wearing your robe, drinking from your mug, eventually wake up too. That evening, Clara walked to the community center and signed up to lead a support circle, not as a therapist, not as a teacher. As someone who knew how it felt to be erased and who had chosen, piece by piece, to write herself back in. On the form where it asked for her title, she didn't write Mrs. or Miss or divorced. She just wrote Clara, because now that name was finally hers again. Clara found the note taped to her door just after sunset. "Let's be civilized. One dinner. No lawyers. I'll explain everything." Tea. She read it twice, then tossed it in the sink. But something about the calm in those words unsettled her more than the anger ever had. Julia warned her, "Don't go." But Clara knew she had to. Not for him. For the version of herself who'd once whispered yes to everything just to avoid no. They met at a downtown restaurant, upscale, dim, private. Tom was already seated, a glass of red wine untouched before him. "You look good," he said. She didn't reply. "I'm not here to argue," he continued. "This whole escalation, it's embarrassing." Clara leaned in. "You forged my name, installed cameras, had me erased." Tom kept his voice even. "You disappeared first, Clara. Don't pretend you didn't check out. I just finalized what you started." She shook her head. "You didn't want a divorce. You wanted silence. You didn't leave me. You deleted me." He finally looked angry. "You're turning this into something it wasn't." Clara stood. "It already is." He reached into his coat and slid an envelope across the table. "One offer. Take it and we end this now. No court." She opened it. A check. Low. Insulting. Labeled settlement. She smiled, not sweetly. "I'm not here for hush money," she said. "I'm here to watch you sweat while I walk away unbought." She left the envelope on the table and walked out without another word. Tom didn't follow. He didn't have to. He'd already lost. The next morning, Clara stood outside the courthouse holding the final copy of the judge's ruling. Fraud confirmed. Lease revoked. Divorce annulled. It wasn't just a legal victory, it was a restoration. She hadn't won everything, but she'd reclaimed what mattered. Her name, her voice, her story. The judge's clerk had offered her the option to return to apartment 4C. Clara declined. "Some doors don't need to be reopened," she'd said. "Just closed, gently." Back in the studio, Clara packed her few things. Not to leave, just to clear space. She placed the old velvet ring box, still housing the brass key, into a shoebox labeled Past. Next to it, she set a copy of the court ruling. And then, at the very top of the box, she added a fresh orchid. The one that had appeared weeks ago had withered, but she'd bought this one herself. Same white petals, same open bloom. Julia watched from the doorway. "You finally moving on?" Clara smiled. "No, I already did." That weekend, Clara hosted her first support group at the community center. 3 women showed up, then 5. One cried through the whole thing. One said nothing at all. One asked, "How did you do it?" Clara answered quietly, "By remembering I wasn't the one who broke things. I just stopped pretending they weren't broken." The women nodded, and for the first time, Clara wasn't alone in the truth. It was quiet on the subway ride home. Clara sat by the window, fingers loosely holding a copy of the flyer they'd made for next week's group. She watched people file in and out at each stop, lives brushing past hers, all of them carrying some unseen weight. She wondered how many had ever been erased and didn't even realize it. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. One new voicemail. She hesitated, then listened. It was Tom's voice, tired, distant. "I'm leaving the city. Thought you should know. You won. Or maybe I lost. Doesn't matter. I just wanted to say you were never invisible to me, Clara. You just made me feel small. And I didn't know how to handle that." He paused. "Sorry," or whatever version of that you're willing to hear. The message ended. She didn't save it. Back home, Clara opened her notebook, the one where she'd written everything that hurt, everything that healed, and everything in between. She tore out the last page. It read, "I miss who I thought you were." She folded it once and dropped it into the trash, not out of bitterness, but because she no longer needed it to be true. The next morning she bought paint, a fresh coat of white for the walls, yellow for the window trim, and soft blue for the door. She didn't call it a new beginning. She just called it hers. 2 weeks later, Clara stood in line at a coffee shop she'd never been to before. The air smelled like roasted beans and early ambition. A young man behind the counter scribbled names too fast, misspelling most of them. When it was her turn, he asked, "Name for the order." She hesitated for half a second, then smiled. "Clara." He nodded, wrote it down, called it out 5 minutes later. But when she picked up the cup, she saw he'd written Clara an A where the E should have been. She almost corrected him. But then she laughed instead, because this version misspelled and all was still hers. It wasn't a copy, wasn't forged. It didn't come from someone else's hand. Came from now. She sat by the window and sipped slowly. Watching people rush by, she didn't feel behind. She didn't feel forgotten. She felt present. She felt real. And sometimes that was more than enough. Spring arrived quietly. No grand announcement, just a shift in light, the way the mornings felt less like survival and more like invitation. Clara stood at the threshold of her new apartment, a modest one-bedroom tucked above a florist's shop. The rent was fair, the ceilings were low, the windows opened wide. She held a small brass key in her hand, not the one from the velvet box, but a new one One she'd been given by a landlord who shook her hand, not her worth. Inside, the walls were bare, but not empty. She'd hung a corkboard by the window. On it, a photo of her and Julia, arms around each other, grinning with exhaustion. A flyer for next month's support circle. The faded grocery rewards card she'd once used to prove she existed. And one sticky note that simply read, "Keep the door open. Someone else might need it." She placed the orchid on the windowsill. Not the old one. A new bloom. White, alive, growing. And as Clara turned the key in her own lock, she smiled, not because she'd come full circle, but because, at last, she wasn't walking through someone else's door. She'd built one of her own. Have you ever lost something, a home, a name, a piece of yourself, and had to fight to get it back? Share your story in the comments. Someone might need your voice tonight. But because, at last, she wasn't walking through someone else's door, she'd built one of her own. Have you ever lost something, a home, a name, a piece of yourself, and had to fight to get it back? Share your story in the comments. Someone might need your voice tonight.